Good morning, grinders, and welcome to a special edition of the MMA Crunch Time Before Lock. It is special because this is a unique card if we have ever had one, Squirrel. I am Mike Brown, aka H3 Buddha, here with Squirrel Patrol for literally the craziest card we've ever been dealt. Squirrel, I can't wait to hear your overall thoughts on this card, but I mean, of course we need a heavyweight main event. Of course we need 1,000,000 to 1 favorites. And I think it's unique because you know where the ownership's going. But how do you invest into these plus 600 dogs and whatnot? It's very, very tricky.
Yeah, it's a weird card. I wasn't expecting like Gaziev to be in a main event. I mean, he's just like a guy on the December UFC or like the pay-per-view card. And suddenly he's got a 5-round fight. It's March. It's a weird card. There's some really like strong favorites. Then the flip side of that is obviously some like underdogs that have virtually no chance of winning. I think it's interesting from a DFS perspective because things are priced right, like and there is no mid range this week. There is literally almost no mid range. Like there's just no fighters in those price slots, and so we have to make decisions as like DFS players. And it's I don't know. I've thought about like doing all kinds of things this week. Like, should we consider stacking non main event fights? I'm not sure if I'm going to get there, but like maybe in 150 lineups, maybe I will try that. I don't see why stacking Makayev and like Alex Perez
Exactly.
would be worse than stacking like Gaziev and Rozenstruik this week. We'll see. I do think that because of the really, really strong favorites and the really, really weak underdogs, and you have the line equity on the one fight, right? The late replacement fight got priced like too cheaply because the line moved immediately. I think you'll see some really common constructions, and so you'll see some very heavily duplicated lineups. And so I think it's a good week to get different. Like it's a good week to just avoid that common construction and get a little bit different.
But isn't there a way that you can gain leverage on that spot too? I mean, that's going to be one of the all-action fights, period. It's just one of those spots where I understand stylistically it looks like that Oliveira guy needs to probably get a knockout. And if he gets a knockout early and then you have Sopaj as a 0, that's even more of another layer to this. Like Squirrel, I think it's just that crazy of a card where it's frustrating. Like you said, I want points. And what I'm looking for are the fights that are more likely to get over what? 1.5, 2.5 rounds? Like, that's wild. That's the context of the slate.
Yeah, it is, and that's actually another wrinkle is that we've got a bunch of high-scoring fighters. So this is one where you don't necessarily want the first round finish because we've got these like chain wrestler type guys that get like 10, 11 takedowns, and so if they're getting more than that 30 points per round or whatever, then suddenly you don't want them to get the finish. You want them to keep going. You're like, let's take this to the next round. Get 3 or 4 more takedowns. Get 4.5 more minutes of control time. And with some of the really weak underdogs, you can absolutely see that where maybe you just want the guy that's going to last the longest and take that favorite fighter just because he's going to have an opportunity to rack up points over 3 rounds, which is like the opposite of how we usually are approaching these cards.
Exactly. And I think sometimes when this happens, I organically will be going towards those fighters that are expected to get that 2.5 rounds because I feel like that money line equity starts coming into play. Like you said, points are going to be at a premium, obviously, top to bottom. But I think it leads me to the first kind of context. And I'm not going to really say that this is the starting point of your lineups, but I mean, Basharat versus Zahabi is the one that kind of sticks out as that fight that is expected to go to a decision. Now, of course, stylistically, Basharat could take him down and control him for 3 rounds. Like, that's even more crazy. So it feels like one of those situations where normally I would like to get behind a guy like Zahabi. I don't think he's going to necessarily win the fight, right? But I think that if he over 3 rounds can get you 25 to what? It's crazy to say that, right? But like 45 points, I wouldn't hate that on this slate.
Yeah, and so this is Liam's like big long shots underdog pick of the week in his article, like in the ground and pound and stuff. I was so happy to hear that because like this is the fighter that I want to take for like points that he might get in a loss. I think the key thing that Liam pointed out in his article is that Boshrot's lost at least one round in. I think he's just lost one round in each of his UFC wins. And he is undefeated, but he's like stylistically, yeah, he's got a style that does not score very well. Like he doesn't get a bunch of takedowns, doesn't generally get the
No pitter patter.
Done okay, but like for a huge favorite, like he doesn't put up his like monster 120-point scores. And the fact is, he's 3-0, so he's won all of his fights. He doesn't really have an incentive to change that style. So he is likely to get like a lower scoring win that like maybe doesn't pay off his price tag. But that if that leaves like Zahabi around, right, for 3 rounds, and Zahabi's like not a he is the best of these like really long shot fighters, right? Like
Yep.
in terms of actual like UFC talent. So like if he's getting some reversals or whatever the case may be, like those like hidden grappling points, or if he's getting a takedown of his own, or like
reversals,
reversals, like or like what Liam is was saying is like maybe even if he wins the fight, then he is one of the keys to the whole slate. I mean, if one of these guys priced below 7,000 wins, like that's the key to the slate. You're gonna have to have that guy on your lineup with such strong favorites, unless you see like total chaos where like multiple of them win. But I was just looking like summing up the win odds, right? It's one of the things I like to do is like look at the fighters and just start adding up their chances of a win, because it doesn't seem like much. You've got a lot of the fighters have like a 15% chance to win. That seems like nothing. At the end of the card, you've got like Almakan at 11, Cunningham at 13, Zahabi's only at 15, Pickett's at 20, but it starts to add up. And chances are at least one of these fighters below 7,000, like at 7,000 or below, is going to win their fight. And if you start going like below 7,600, chances are 2 of them are going to win. So yeah, you got to find those 2.
And it's terrifying. Like you said, stylistically, top to bottom, it's just even more tricky layers to this card. And it's funny, we talk about Zahabi. The reason I'm bringing him up is Lineup HQ had a little goof up.
Yeah.
He would have been somebody I would have been tagging. So let's just kind of hit on guys you and I would have been tagging through the week. He's one I definitely would have had to get behind because of that potential equity over 3 rounds. So blindly, I would have tried to jam in a guy like Almakan, right? I mean, I like these Kazakhstani guys. They know how to wrestle. They know how to strike. He somewhat looks fraudulent, though. I got to be honest. He's got a great looking record here with 16-1, but he's going against the biggest favorite on the card. Umar Nurmagomedov has done nothing but take scalps in the UFC, and it's not like I could just say, all right, with confidence, you're going to get some points out of Almakan. You know what I mean? Like normally on a blank slate, I'm going to be like, all right, Kazakhstani guy, I'm in.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. Actually, looking around like the industry, I've seen a site that has Umar projected at 25 points below some of the other fighters. 25 points below Klein, which was really surprising to me. So yeah, Umar might not get such high ownership. People are using that site. They're not going to get that high ownership on Umar, which I find really interesting. Because he was a fighter that's maybe going to end up like under the field, thinking he's going to be like too highly owned for 9,700. But I may adjust that based off of like industry projections and try, because I don't think that site is right. It's not us. I think Umar should be projected much higher. As kind of we have him. But yeah, so
tricky to
like
play
65.
him.
Was it?
It's very tricky to play him though at 97.
Yeah.
That's a high price tag. One of the most expensive we've had.
It is, yeah. But if he's not seeing high ownership, then maybe I do want to go there. But yeah, 6,500. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, these 65, 66, $6,700 fighters.
What does he have to do? Does he just have to survive 3 rounds? Honestly, like if he survives and overproduces for what his value is, I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying, how are you handling it?
I'm gonna be overweight like these guys. Like I'm gonna be over our projected ownership on these guys. I think you have to be. And I think this is a card where I'm gonna go in. I'm gonna try to be different, and I'm gonna be okay with the idea. I might get less of, like, if I don't win the tournament, I might get like much less of my money back than I normally get. Because I'm gonna try to be over the field on these guys. because just last week we saw Alto Marino outscored his opponent in a loss. He put up like 71 points. It was a very questionable decision. But because it was so questionable, like he had more like strikes, more takedowns, more control time. Like he got all of the things in DraftKings scoring. So we have seen a losing fighter like outscore his opponent that won, and we've seen like losing fighters outscore other winning fighters like elsewhere on the card. Like that probably happens once every couple of months. If that happens on this card, like you're going to need that lower price fighter. So yeah, I guess we should talk about the lineup HQ tags. Like if you go in and read like my takedowns article, basically I had those 4 guys tagged. I think it was Zahabi. So Ayman Zahabi because of the price. Tyson Pedro. I think if he gets a win, it's probably going to be a high scoring win. I had Radzabov tagged for the grappling points. He's an underdog that I'm targeting, and then Sopaj, just the win equity. Like I think he's going to be highly owned. So if I have him in a lineup, I'm going to try to get different elsewhere in that lineup. But yeah, those are my 4 tags for the underdogs were Sopaj, Radzabov, Tyson Pedro, and Zahabi. And then in terms of a favorite, I had Makayev tagged.
Yeah, and so for tags for me, I was kind of alluding to Umar would not have been one. I would have been on 2 particular favorites here. It would have been Ludovic Klein. I really think that he's got an opponent that is quite literally the definition of a punching bag. He's got a guy that absorbed over 100 strikes in the Contender Series, a guy that probably will be able to get taken down. I think it might be one of those classic, like, take him down, path of least resistance, try to get him out of there early. As you see, we have producer Devin tagging the guys with the little lock buttons because that's what we're thinking. We don't have the lineup with the switch over, but yeah, Klein is one. I also like Mokaev. Mokayev's hard to ignore on this slate against an opponent who so many question marks. Usually I like to bet into question marks, to be fair. Like boxing range, I think Perez should have an advantage. On the feet, he should have an advantage. But Mokayev's style is smother, smother, smother. If Perez stops takedowns, everybody should be scared to death because he will be the context to the whole slate. And you're opening up. I see your face like the whole slate's going to really open up if Perez has a showing here and he's not somebody that's been injured. Coming into this fight, it was like, is he going to make weight? He makes weight fine, Squirrel.
Yeah. So he's one of those fighters. So Alex Perez is one of those fighters that, if he wins, it breaks the slate wide open. I kind of like Makayev here, but I guess something we should talk about as well is, line movement since weigh-ins. Makayev's like lost a little bit of win equity. It's almost like people were expecting Alex Perez to like just miss weight or something, or I don't know. But like, so Perez's win odds have gotten a little bit better. Somebody whose win odds have gotten a lot better, and I'm starting to target a little bit, is Christian Duncan. He's gone from about, I think, a 70% win odds to about 75, win probability. So we've seen some pretty big line movement there. So, I do like Alex Perez is an underdog. I think you've got to take with some lineups if you're multi-entering. But yeah, I still like Makayev and then Christian Duncan as well.
Yeah, for the underdog side of things, I would be tagging Zahabi. I'd be tagging the same one. Sopaj, it's hard to ignore. That's the organic play of the week, right? And how I'm personally going to be attacking it is I'm going to know if I win or lose. I'm going to probably be targeting Sopaj. So I have to target him and tag him, right? Because he's got the money line. He's got the style that should be grindy. My concern here, though, is his gas tank. He's coming in late notice here, right? How many times have we seen late notice gassers? They come out hot in the first round and then they give up 1,000,000 points once they gas out. We have a guy who is a little bit crazy in Oliveira. I don't know if you saw any of their altercations behind the scenes. It wasn't anything crazy, but they're like, I'm going to take your limb home. I'm going to take your head off with me. Like, there's a little animosity. Like, there's going to be a lot of adrenaline, right? So I would argue on this particular slate, if Oliveira gets a first round finish, the whole slate explodes. I mean, let's be honest. Because of that ownership that's expected on Sopaj, the whole slate is just on its head. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And it's about a 22% chance that Oliveira gets that first round win. I mean, Sopaj has 17% chance. I think you've got to go over the field on this fight. But I think, a lot of people are going to have Sopaj, but then I think you've got to have Oliveira because
But
it could,
isn't that the decision? It's like
yeah.
you can't really fade this fight because of the price, and like you said, nowhere to go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's in the mid range where there isn't a lot of other fights. Literally, I mean, usually we see somebody at about every like $100 or $200 price increment on DraftKings. This week it is not priced like that, and it's the first week I can recall like that where there is, there's nobody between at 8,800, at 8,700, at 8,500. 82, 81, 8,000. There are no
No
fighters
mid-range. It sucks.
so it makes those fighters that are in like the 8,600 like Oliveira, 8,400, 8,300. It makes you kind of have to take probably at least one of them just to make your lineups work. Otherwise, you're picking guys that are fighting against each other.
I cannot wait to give you my thoughts though on the main event and how that goes with the Gaziev and Rozenstruik right in the middle, because there is a world where the exact outcome is Gaziev takes him down first round, second round controls him, and then Rozenstruik hits that monster shot and you get 60 points in a win or 65 points. And I think that's a legit outcome. The problem is you have to be targeting this fight at a high rate. And at half the ownership, the dude has absolute atomic heat in his hands. And we see that it can go deep into fights. The Overeem fight, let's point right to that fight. Overeem won the fight, pillar to post pretty much. The last 10 seconds of the fight, boom, he obliterates his face. His face is like falling off. His lips falling off. So this guy can actually score you points with one punch. Problem is, he's probably going to be on his back or controlled or a slower pace. He doesn't throw at a lot of volume. So you're buying into a commodity that is volatile scoring-wise, but the ceiling is what I'd be paying for.
Yeah, Overeem, that was one where I had to Google to make sure he was okay. It was shocking. He showed up to like a press conference a few weeks later, and he looked fine. He did not look like he was going to look fine by the end of the fight. But it was like Overeem was winning that one, I feel like, and then and then it was like the one punch at the end,
like 10 seconds left. Boom.
Yeah. I might try to go under the field on the main event, and that might be a very risky thing to do.
To win this week and be solo or be somewhat unique, that's not that bold of a take, I don't think. I mean, it's bold, right? But personally, 100% agree. You can definitely go.
This is one of the least appealing main events that we've seen. Like in terms of like stacking for cash or whatever, I remember like writing is like this is one of the worst ones we've seen because like it's really just any other fight. It is not expected to go the 5 rounds. It's heavyweights, like they're not necessarily going to be that high scoring. So this is one where and I think the main event is still going to see like the excess ownership that it usually sees because it could go 5 rounds. But this one's almost certainly not going to go 5 rounds.
How do you handle it stylistically? Because you have Gaziev, people want to invest into the grappler. And it's like, what has Rozenstruik done before? He's had these grapplers that come and boom, lights them up with something. So it's like, do you take an over stance on Rozenstruik and pray? I mean, you said you're going to go underweight, but like, I don't think you have to do too much to get overweight on Rozenstruik this late.
Yeah, I probably I'll particularly look to be underweight on Gaziev. Like I probably will have like Rozenstruik at 25% or higher. We've got him projected in terms of ownership, because he actually does have like I think a 20% chance of winning in the first round. Yeah, it's like 19.9 by my calculations, but about 20%. So yeah, and so at 7,900 with like almost nothing else in the mid range. Like if he gets that first round win, I mean, and it could even actually be like a second round win. Like that might be enough at 7,900, especially if all the other big favorites put up like monster scores. Like you might need a 7,900 second round win. But I think like Gaziev is probably just like any other fighter on this card. There's nothing wrong with him. It's just like he's seeing more than 50% projected ownership. And I think that's just due to him being in the 5-round main event, but it's probably not going to be a 5-round main event. So suddenly he doesn't look like like suddenly comparing him to to Oliveira or to Al Sawadi, it's not yeah, it's like no longer like he's no longer so appealing um just because he's in the 5 round main event. It's probably not going to go that long.
And I am going to be building lineups where I like double leverage in this range. And I got to be honest, I think you can go to, direct leverage against a Sopaj, right? And I just don't see people gravitating towards Oliveira, and I don't mind taking a shot there. And then it's contingent on going down below that 7K and getting one of those guys, but then getting another leverage point. And I'm going to talk about a leverage point that I don't think people are necessarily going to go towards. You and I would have been tagging low-key Rajabov, right? This guy, Tajikistan, takedowns, somewhat durable. Of course, he faced a monster last time out that absolutely destroyed him pretty much, put up a zillion points. This guy, Rajabov, looks like an all-action fighter. He's going to be getting a million points with takedowns and controls if he's getting his offense off, or he's going to be giving up a lot of points. Now, Al Sawadi, Squirrel, this guy is not going to have a lot of volume, but I think he's going to be drawn into a scoring affair. And there's another leverage point for you, and I'm going to be thinking of is Al Sawadi, man. This guy could absolutely hit Rajabov, hurt him, get the respect, stop the takedown. I don't know if you saw him. The dude is shredded. If he just stops those takedowns, I think Al Sawadi is an interesting play if he gets a first or a second round finish on this slate. But unfortunately, before I give it to you, Rajabov could get a takedown or two, score some points for fantasy-wise, and then get destroyed.
Yeah, so like this fight, we've got this fight, both sides projected for just a little bit of over the ownership of Gaziev, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in this pricing, like I like the idea of targeting this fight rather than the main event. And I do like maybe going with Radzhabov more than Al Saladi. We've seen some of these I think Al Saladi is a contender series guy. I think he's had a fight since then. But we've seen some of these contender series guys come in as like big favorites and like underperform and get. And it's like it's not that shocking if you think about it. It's kind of like any rookie making their debut under the big lights for the first time. And so Razabov, has made the walk before, right? And he's put up big high scoring wins. Like, and he's a guy that actually in his debut, put up a big high scoring win, 11 takedowns and 21 attempts. If we see something like that in this fight, that's going to be that higher scoring fight. You're going to want to have targeted this fight more than the main event. I do like the Razabov side, both for the savings and
you have to
going. It seems like these contender series guys always get like their price always moves. Their odds always move in their favor.
This was a 180.
Yeah.
Minus 175. Boom. Plus, it completely 175 the other way.
And I do think if you look on Tapology or use a site like that, which I highly recommend for researching. Yes, there's some really good sites out there. I think it's Topology is one that I generally use. It lets you kind of vote if you're a registered member. Anybody can just go on and vote on who they think is going to win the fight. These contender series guys always show up as 80% in their favor on Tapology. Then the odds come out much more even than that. And then they everybody bets on the contender series guys. But I think it's just because they're kind of popular fighters, right? People like to see those guys on the minor leagues, right? It's the prospect you follow in the minors. Yep.
They're getting finishes.
Yeah, I'd bet on Radzhabov here, and I will be taking him in my DFS lineups.
I agree 100%. He's the play from a pure fantasy standpoint. I just worry about that leverage with Al Sawadi in an early finish. This context of this slate is just making me over analyze each fight. And I feel like because of Rajabov's pace, that scoring ability for Al Sawadi somehow goes up. But normally this guy will not be scoring. So you and I are on the same page in the middle range here. Where are we going for the favorites? Because I feel like the ownership is spread out enough and we know somewhat where it's going to go. And here's a guy that Eric Anders. This guy doesn't do any scoring. This guy has no scoring. And now we are going to be forced to invest into a minus 500 Eric Anders. I was shocked, just name value, right? But then I'm like, holy crap, Pickett's 4 straight losses, Squirrel. He can be controlled. I think that's one hidden scoring path here. But I also feel like that's kind of like Bassarat and Anders are the two fights that I feel like people might not go to. And then I'll also somewhat say Urkog is a weird fight on this slate too. So kind of hit on those 3 fights because I think those might be keys. If there is a 105 plus scorer, you're going to want one of those guys.
Yeah, I think Urkog is the one that I like the best. And because he does have like the grappling, but it's like if you start thinking about the grapplers on this card, right? It's like Nurmagomedov Umar. It's Umar, it's Radsabov, it's Makayev, right? Like those kinds of names. And then there's this guy like Steve Urkog that looks like he should be doing like a pre-lock show. He's got the
He's
floppy
doing our
hair, like the
show, yeah.
bags. Yeah, like he's got the floppy hair, the bags under the eyes. His name is like Steve Urkog, and you're like, well, but he could actually outscore the other guys. So I kind of like Urkog, and like I think he's going to be underowned. He's like not really that appealingly priced. He's like 9,200. Like he's priced above Petrino and Makayev, and he does not look like he should be playing the same like sports as those guys, right?
You know what's also interesting about him? He's got an opponent in front of him in Mashnell who this guy's long in the tooth and he gives up points in bunches. He can get knocked down multiple times. He sometimes gets back up after he gets knocked down. He will go for grappling exchanges. This is one of those situations where you're investing in the fight as a whole, I think, right? And if you're going to get behind like a Matt Schnell, I'm not going to be mad if I get beat by him because, like you said, the not imposing Urkog kind of has him beat everywhere, and he's kind of moving his way up the rankings, but he's hidden, right? He's underowned for where his ceiling can be on this slate.
Yeah, I agree. And then, so I like Urkog the best. I like Eric Anders, I think, after that. And then probably Basharat, the least favorite. My concern with Basharat is that he doesn't need to change his style, which is not something that like necessarily accumulates a ton of DraftKings points. And this is a card where you can see some of these grapplers like really putting up like massive scores. And then in terms of the other like favorites, I like Christian Leroy Duncan. The odds have really moved in his favor, both in terms of win odds and first round finish. And so you're actually getting some win equity now on Duncan. I think he's now got better chance for he's got a better chance for a win than both Petrino and Makayev now, just by a hair, which is pretty interesting because those 2 guys are priced above him. And he's got a better chance of a first round finish than those 2 guys. So, like Duncan and like Ludovic Klein as well. I agree. AJ Cunningham can give up some points. So that should be interesting.
I mean, I don't want to put it out there because I don't want to do a shoey ever in my life, but I feel like if Cunningham wins this fight, I might be forced to because like I don't know what his path is. What is this dude's path to winning? Like, is it a flash knockout? Like, Klein is pretty. I mean, he's been having a lot of vitamins into his body. Let's put it that way. He looks very healthy.
Is that Ludovic Klein?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see the ownership here.
It will.
I think Umar is going to be higher owned than Klein.
And I don't think that's smart. I think that makes Klein that much more of a play. I'm going to be buying into those fighters that will give up points and have hidden scoring, whether it be just being a punching bag in Cunningham, whether it be getting controlled on the mat, where there might be a feeling out period, at least for a few minutes before Umar steps on that gas, right? Like he might be like, hey, here's a Kazakhstani guy, right? We're both from the stands. We're going to mitigate risk and try to just not grapple. I'll outstrike him for a few. Maybe I'll take him down at the end of the first. So like there's some scoring, but let me circle back to one fight that you just mentioned, the Leroy Duncan fight. That's a very tricky fight for the context of the slate because Liam nailed it. Liam behind the paywall says it's an IQ test, right? What do you do against Claudio Ribeiro? You grip him, you put him against the cage, you take him down, you control him against the cage, and you get these little elbows, and maybe you get a couple power shots off as his durability is there. The scoring falls off a cliff in this fight. That's the problem, and I agree with you. I think Duncan should go for takedowns. Will he? I don't know. This fighter is a little volatile with his style. He'd rather just stand and bang, and he very much clearly can land that heavy on Ribeiro, but doesn't it make Ribeiro a little bit playable and under-owned? I mean, for what his ceiling is, because he'd have to get a knockout to win the fight, I'd imagine, especially with these money line odds. What's his inside the distance? I'm going to pull it up while I'm tossing it over to you. But do you have any interest? You did give Leroy Duncan, but Ribeiro as at least an upside type play for GPP?
Maybe, I don't know. The line movement gives me pause. Because like updating my sheet for Mike yesterday to today, Duncan went from about minus 300 to minus 400, which
Yeah.
is a pretty big jump. So, and we've talked about this before. People see stuff at weigh-ins. Maybe they hear things or whatever.
Yeah.
After weigh-ins. Could be just the way the fighter looks. Maybe something said at the press conference, gives an insight into their training or lack thereof, or, they're not taking, maybe get a sense they're just showing up for a paycheck. I have done well, and I know you've done well as well. We've talked about on the show, like going with these guys that have strong line movement in their favor going into the fight. So I do think Ribeiro is a dangerous fighter, and I'll certainly have roster him on some percentage of my.
If it goes 3 rounds, he's in play. If it goes, the longer the fight goes, he's going to be in play. That's how scary this is.
Yeah, 7,300. So he's the most expensive guy after like the price gap, right after the price jump from Sopaj to Ribeiro. Seeing half the ownership of the fighter price right, right above him. I kind of prefer going down to Tyson Pedro. I think
that's where my segue was before we get off the show, because I think Pedro is one of the most GPP type of fighters. This guy can score 100 plus points anytime he is out there, and he seems to be a 500 fighter at this stage. Squirrel, like you look into his history, he steps up in competition and he gets set back. Now he's in a situation where they're both. I think Tyson's still a prospect, right? He's trying to work his way up. He's not too long in the tooth, but he's got Petrino, who's been a fantasy darling, and a guy at 9K who he doesn't have the most fancy name in the world, right? He doesn't have any name value. He doesn't have any love, but I still feel like there's going to be enough resistance from Pedro that Petrino's not a mortal lock for me on this slate. On another slate, I would say I would like to get behind him, but he's dealing with Makayev above him. And then, Pedro in a 3-round decision might not score that bad either.
Yeah, I think it's unlikely to go 3 rounds. But like Pedro, I agree. Like Pedro's got 5 fights of 100 or more DK points, like 5 wins of 100 or more DK points. I think all first round finishes. So that's kind of his style of fight, and so it makes us a fight to target. I like Petrino, and I'll have Petrino as one of my favorites that I like. But Tyson Pedro is only 7,200. So Petrino has a chance of getting a convincing win and not landing on the winning lineup. If Tyson Pedro gets that first round finish, he's on the winning lineup at 7,200 on this card, almost certainly. Because unless you see, another couple of these fighters, price beneath them win. But Tyson Pedro, for his low win odds, and basically it means for his price, has pretty good first round finish equity. So I'll go there. It's interesting, Claudio Ribeiro and Tyson Pedro have about the same win odds and the same first round win odds, but with the odds kind of going in the opposite directions since weigh-ins, I do kind of prefer Tyson Pedro to Ribeiro.
Yeah, and my 2 questions to you before we sign off here, very simple. How many losers are on a winning lineup? How much money is going to be left on the table? That is the real question. Because you could easily build a lineup with some money on the table, but man, that decision making makes you terrified.
So I don't love leaving money on the table as a programmatic thing, right? If you're using an optimizer, setting the price ceiling, I generally don't like that as much as I used to 3 or 4 years ago, because now so many people do it that you're not necessarily avoiding the duplication that you thought you would. But this is an interesting one because of the price gaps. A lot of times you end up with the decision point of you either have to leave 300-400 on the table, or you have to pick 2 fighters against each other. And so in this case, I would actually, generally prefer to leave, $300 or $400 on the table. So it's an interesting card fight. I would not be afraid
How many losers?
I would not get to a point where you have like 300 on the table and I have to start adjusting things, right? Because that could just be a result of the price gaps. So yeah, I think it's a good one.
One or two losers on the winning lineup. One or two.
Yeah, if we have happy birthday.
I have no clue where that came from.
Yeah. So yeah, balloons aside, I don't know. Maybe it's a good point, a good sign that we're gonna have multiple losers on the winning lineup. Yeah, I do. I think like Zahabi is the one that I'm most interested in with that kind of thought process in mind. Maybe Amakan after that, 6,500. I don't really recall that many $6,500 fighters. And it does make you think, like, yeah, like if he wins a round, yeah, I mean, if he wins a round and put up like 50 something points, right, in a loss, you can see it. I mean, yeah, I mean, if
we're sniffing it out, at least it's in the realm of possibilities, and that's all that matters. And especially with what he allows you to do, you can get anybody and everybody above what that price gap in at that point, the 8,600. You can go all the way up.
Yeah, and I think you should at least own these, like roster these guys at their win odds, which are sometimes more than you would think, right? Like 15-20% chance of winning the fight is not nothing. It is that means that if you take 5 of these guys, one of them is probably going to win. So yeah, I don't be afraid of the really low price underdogs on this one.
All the pressure's on us. Producer Devin steps in for TJ, who's been nothing shy of a money train. So, Devin, I don't know what you're going to do here, but good luck. Win equity on the slates, right? The smaller the slate is, the more that win equity means a lot more. So, Squirrel, what are you going to tell Devin before we sign off?
I would, go with a couple. You have to go with a couple of underdogs. Like Sopaj is probably the best win equity. So I wouldn't necessarily shy away from the high ownership there. Like if you're doing multiple lineups, I wouldn't have him at like more than 45% because that's just like basically his chances of winning the fight. And then in terms of like the really low price underdogs, the ones I like are like probably Tyson Pedro, and then Zahabi, and then probably go for some like Christian Leroy Duncan if you believe the odds moving in his favor, and maybe it's a good one to fade the main event.
Yeah, I'm doing single entry today, so I think Zahabi and Sopaj seems like a great place to start there at the lower end.
I'll tell you what I'm doing. If I'm doing single entry, Devin, I'm taking 2 leverage points. So middle range, 2 leverage points.
Is that Oliveira?
Zahabi. Sounds like you're on the same page. Yeah, it would be.
I've been listening.
It's a direct leverage against like 50% ownership, the smaller field. So we appreciate you guys tuning in. Next week, we have UFC 299 O'Malley versus Vera, 2 5-round fights, a lot better of a card, 14 fights. We will see you guys next week.